when we thought about people that know a lot about product, specifically hike product, and we talked with folks at HOKA, that Melanie's name kept coming up over and over again. And we were thrilled because we've worked with Melanie over the years to give us, these table talks, give us this perspective on product. And one of the things I really love about Melanie is she knows a little bit about everything in the HOKA line. So we can get that great comparative analysis. But also, Melanie happens to be this amazing through hiker. I don't even know how many miles she's put on shoes. Maybe she has an estimate. But let's bring Melanie up to be able to sort of tear through some of the wonderful HOKA products today that we have slated to take a look at. Melanie, good morning. I guess maybe not quite morning for you anymore. Welcome.
Still AM. Yeah,
Okay.
it's still in the AM for another 55 minutes.
Okay. All right. And Melanie, where are you calling in from today?
I'm calling in from Nashville, Tennessee.
Nashville, Tennessee. Lovely. I've never been there,
Yes.
but I've always wanted to go. Well, welcome. And my name is Marshall. For those of you who don't know me, I'm calling in from Winthrop, Washington, in the heart of the Cascades in Washington State. So we are far apart from each other with Melanie, but this is the awesome thing of doing these virtual calls is we can all come together and discuss. Melanie, what is your role at HOKA?
I am a HOKA field experience representative. So, like I said, I'm based here in Nashville and I cover the entire state of Tennessee. And then I have a tiny little corner of Virginia, Damascus, Virginia, which is my favorite part of Virginia. So I feel lucky to have that little corner.
And what sort of how long have you been doing this, and what kind of brought you to this job?
Yeah, so I've been with HOKA for 5 years. I started in March of 2020, which was a super interesting time to start a
Yeah,
new job.
something
Um,
happened in March of
yeah,
2020.
yeah. So that was an interesting time. Previously, I'd worked at a local outfitter here in Nashville called Cumberland Transit as their women's buyer and marketing and events for them.
Oh, cool. So you kind of come in from that perspective of having been a buyer, but now working as a field experience representative.
Yes.
That's pretty great to be able to bring that together. And
Yeah.
as I've alluded to, and as we've discussed in the years past, what is some of your passions and your pastimes?
Yeah, so I really love the trail, running on it, hiking it. I've done a lot of miles in Hokas. I've been with Hoka for 5 years, like I said, but in 2023, I took a 5 month hiatus from Hoka and I hiked the Continental Divide Trail southbound.
Hmm.
And that was the completion of what they call the Triple Crown. So I have also done the Appalachian Trail in 2016 with my dog who has now passed away, and then me and my partner did the Pacific Crest Trail in 2018 northbound. Had to remember. I was like, wait, what year was it? Yeah, 2018 PCT. So I am now a triple crowner, which like 2 years later still feels wild to say.
Yeah, right. So what's next? Are you gonna do them in all the opposite directions, or?
I'm really into like 500 miles or less now.
Okay,
Not quitting my job distances.
just short hikes, you know. Uh,
Yeah.
well, that's great. And actually, I'm curious, as somebody who's done a lot of through hiking and done a lot of distance hiking, right? What is some wisdom you can impart upon us? What's something you wished you had known at the onset of this that you now know?
Yeah, I think a lot of people, including myself, they get so caught up in who who's wearing what and what gear you need and if, this through hiker did it in these shoes or this backpack, then I can do it too. And I think I wish I just would have been better about what's actually right for me personally, as opposed to, Googling what's the number one shoe on the AT or what's the most popular backpack? And it took me a really long time. It took me two through hikes to really realize which shoes were right for me, which backpack was right for me. So just knowing that not what everybody else is carrying and wearing is what's right for you. And I think that helps with confidence too. I wish someone would have told me that like I could have done it my own way. So it took me a long time to learn that, but I think I've got it down now.
And what is that process? How do you analyze a shoe to see if it's right for you in this setting?
Yeah, so with the AT, I just got whatever was on sale at REI, which is a pair of La Sportiva boots. I can't even remember what they were, and I have blisters the whole entire time, but I was like, I guess this is just my life. And then on the PCT, I wore the most popular shoes at the time, which were the Solomon X Mission. And they were great shoes, but they weren't right for my foot. And I was just wearing them because that's what everybody else is wearing.
Mm.
And then in 2020, January of 2020, the local HOKA rep at the time gave me a pair of Speed Goats, and my life truly changed. And I was like, whoa, you don't have to have blisters. Maybe I should have figured out what my feet actually need instead of looking what everybody else was wearing.
And how, I mean, you had hundreds and hundreds of miles to kind of decide this was the right thing, but how do you now sort of decide if there's an update to a shoe? How do you figure out if this shoe is fitting you or if it's the right thing for you on a hike? What parameters are you looking at, or what tests
Yeah.
do you run to kind of help consider that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I could say that like every update's going to be great, and our shoes change for usually for the good. But every time a shoe updates, I make sure that I go and run and hike, and I'm initially looking for step and feel. You want it to feel comfortable as soon as you put it on, but everything feels quite nice in the store, and it's going to feel. I always tell people if you don't like it in here, you're not going to like it out there. So making sure that you go get those shoes muddy and really put some miles on them. My boss, Cassie, my manager, Cassie, who hopefully most of y'all will meet this week and hopefully at her conversation tonight, but she always says you put at least 20 miles on the shoe. And I think that's really good advice. I do a lot of demo runs as a field experience rep, and those are great because it gives folks the opportunity to go out and test out the shoe in the elements. Usually those are 3 to 5 miles, but you can at least have um, a good initial perspective on the shoe.
Right? So giving it 20 miles to really see if those hotspots are hotspots or if the shoe's going to loosen up. I mean, of course, like you
Mhm.
said, it's got to fit okay in the store to begin with, but things will amplify. And it sounds like after about 20 miles is when you would really kind of have some confidence that this shoe is going to indeed work, or like, nope, not going to work for me today, or ever.
Yeah,
So yeah, and it's very about foot shape. It's about stride. It's about personal preference on all of that a lot, right? Which is really why
absolutely.
there's more than one shoe in the world. So,
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
well, Melanie, let's kind of start to dive into Hoka a little bit deeper, right? You're
Yeah.
a speed goat stoker now, and a shoe that you love to do a lot of your trail running and hiking in. But there are also other products that Hoka makes for specifically for hike that might be better for certain customers. And we're going to
Yes.
dive into some of those new offerings today. But let's kind of roll back a little bit and look at like that framework in which Hoka
Yeah.
exists. I think there's some traits that carry through in every Hoka shoe, and that kind of came up from the beginning, right? So give us a little
Yeah.
bit from the beginning as we roll into this framework to help us understand Hoka shoes.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a picture that I actually took in Chamonix. So this is where Hoka was born, in a town near there called Annecy. Nico and Jean-Luc, our founders, are from this area. Our roots were born in the mountains, and not just born in the mountains. Our first shoes were trail shoes, and I think a lot of people are surprised to know that. So even though our first shoe wasn't a hiking boot, our first shoe was a mafate, which is right here. There she is, the very first Hoka. And we've come a long way since then. So, and I will say that I am a speed goat lover, but I have switched over to loving the Mafate, which is
Okay.
which is this shoe right here. I'm super stoked on the Mafate right now. So, um, stay tuned for a fun update on that next month and then later this year. So, we were born on the trail. We started with the purpose, and our purpose is to make running and hiking and propelling you forward easier. We want to make sure that you can be propelled forward on the trail, running downhill, hiking down mountains, hiking up mountains, making it easier. That is our whole purpose.
Mhm. Right. Just trying to, yeah, I mean, I love that kind of concept of like making the downhill easier, and making the whole hike easier, right? And to do that,
Mhm.
there's this framework that has been developed, right? And now we're going to see this in every Hoka shoe, some version of each of these three characteristics. Um,
Yeah.
can you run us through these characteristics and sort of how they express themselves in the product?
Yeah, absolutely. So these three things you're going to see in every single Hoka shoe, but they're going to look different in every single Hoka shoe. So all Hokas have a cushioned midsole. The purpose of a cushioned midsole is for shock absorption and comfort. So it's what you know and love about Hoka, that cushioned midsole, nice and cushy. It's going to look way different in our hike product and it's going to look way different in our road product, but we're all going to have a cushioned midsole. The second thing that makes Hoka different, and I alluded to it earlier, is the meta rocker or the wheels that move you forward. So when Nico and Jean-Luc were looking at how to shape the bottom of a Hoka, they were looking at their bike wheels. Bikes happen to go downhill very easily, so purpose of the meta rocker is to propel you forward to complement that natural gait cycle. So the third thing that makes Hoka different is the active foot frame. I think when a lot of people look at Hoka, they think, oh no, I'm going to be sitting on all this cushion. It's going to be very unstable. So we combat that with our active foot frame. You're actually sitting about 3 millimeters inside the foam, inside the cushion, inherently secure. So our shoes are not like a stand-up paddleboard. You're not sitting on top of that cushion. Our shoe are like a sit-in kayak. So inherently secure, having a little bit more control. So you're going to see all three of these things in all of our shoes, and they're going to look a little bit different in our hike product. And so we'll kind of touch back on this later, but remember these three things because you will find them in everything that we make.
Yeah, I like having this framework, right, to analyze like how much have you turned up the volume on Meta Rocker, right? That might give an indication on what this shoe is really designed for, or how detuned
Mhm.
is it. But it's always going to be there, right? Because a different user is going to need a different set of these three. But this is a cool framework
Mhm.
in which to explore. And so
Yeah.
what we want to do today is take a little bit closer look at the hike specific product. Now, if any of you all have questions, of course, about other products like the run and the road run and the trail run,
Mhm.
Melanie can definitely answer those questions, and we can get into that at the end here. But please type them in at any point. But today we're going to be exploring more specifically the hike category. What does the hike category mean for Hoka? Why dive into this category?
Yeah, so like I said, we were born on the trail, and even though we are a little bit newer to the hiking specific space, we aren't the type of company just to throw things out there without intention. So, hi Rosario, who hopefully y'all will meet tomorrow during tomorrow? Yes,
Yeah,
tomorrow
tomorrow at this
during,
time. Yep.
yeah. Hopefully you'll meet him tomorrow, but I think you'll find, especially with speaking him tomorrow, but I've had the pleasure of speaking with him quite a bit. He does everything with intention, but he also wants to make sure that we have quality products. So we aren't just going to throw out a product without making sure that it's high quality. So which is why we work with companies like GORE-TEX and Vibram, and making sure that we're focusing on the DNA of Hoka and the roots of Hoka and not changing it just because we've gone to the hike category. So kind of making sure we have that fine line of like, we're still Hoka, but we also want to make sure that people are being able to hike. And what's our purpose, right? Hiking, to make hiking easier, to make going downhill easier. So making sure it's still in the DNA while also being stable, inherently secure. And we want to celebrate the differences. Of course, like the Meta Rocker is going to look way different on our Cielo X1 2.0, which is our racing shoe that our Olympic athletes wear. The Meta Rocker is super intense in that shoe. It's not going to be intense in a hiker because that wouldn't make so much sense because you're most likely not going to be doing a 5 minute mile hiking in this boot. If you do, then more power to you.
There's a bear
So
chasing you,
making,
that's why.
yes, yes, yeah. Also, don't run from a bear.
Okay,
Don't turn
well,
your
solid
back on a
advice.
bear.
Getting back to the
Uh,
advice category.
but yeah, making sure that the DNA trickles down in a very purposeful way. So
Let's look at the whole hike line here just to kind of get this
yeah.
this this high level overview, right? There's a lot of products that can fit into hike for different users and different needs. Today we are going to be focusing in on the Kaha and then a new offering which we don't even see here. But yeah, help us sort of understand why this breadth of hike product.
Yeah, yeah. So the way this is organized is kind of from our most burly boot, the Kaha 3, all the way to our transport. And I'll go over the transport a little bit later, but focusing on the left here with the Kaha. So this is our multi-day hiker. That's what it's made for. And again, celebrating the differences here, but also noticing that we have those three things we talked about earlier. You see a lot of cushion midsole on here. There are some rockers on here, not as intense as some of our other shoes. And then what you can't see is that active foot frame. But making sure that we are sticking to that DNA and kind of see it trickling throughout. And we're really proud of this lineup. Having the Kaha 3 as our multi-day hiker, our burly boot, and then a lighter option in the Anacapa 2. There are no rules. You can definitely day hike in the Kaha and you can long distance backpack in the Anacapa. But one thing that our product team, they don't love the word versatility. They want to make sure that each shoe we come out with has intention, has a purpose. So of course, every shoe on this slide, the purpose is to hike and to make hiking easier, but they all have different characteristics depending on that one end goal. Making sure the end goal is hike, of course, but also personal preference, what is the terrain, and taking all that into account for your personal preferences and where your adventure's taking you.
Well, let's look at this one on the left here, the Kaha 3, right? This is a new offering, not a new offering, but an update, and pretty radical update to
Yeah.
the Kaha. And this is well, what is this category specifically for? Who do you see sort of fitting into the Kaha 3 and the Kaha family in general?
Yeah, yeah. So this is our cute little Kaha family. The Kaha 3 on the left, the Gore-Tex, and then the low Gore-Tex. Those are our newest ones, just updated in January of the newest iteration of the Kaha. We did something a little disruptive in the fall of last year, where your two frost options on the right. So these are going to be for true winter hiking. So they're both rated for -25 degrees, as far as like a weather rating, temperature rating. The Kaha, we like to call it the sleeping bag for your foot. They both have so much technology in them. You got the Gore-Tex, you got the Vibram, and they both have Primaloft. So those aren't necessarily appropriate for all the time because, summer happens and heat happens. So we wanted to have, those winter options in the Frost line, but focusing on the Kaha 3 that just updated in January. This is a really exciting update. Yeah, no Tour Ultra. I saw that in the RIP. Yeah, and then so going to the Kaha 3 on the next slide. So this is our long haul hiker. It's going to be cushier and more durable than ever before. It has a really comfortable step-in feel. So that's what I was talking about earlier. You really want to have that nice step-in feel. It's nice in the store. But then also with the cushier sock liner, it's going to combat some foot fatigue. The purpose of this shoe, as I said before, is for hiking long distances, and for multi-day backpacking. There are no rules here. So you can also do it as a day hike. And we also, have a lot of technology in the shoe, and Marshall will go over it in a few minutes, but has the Gore-Tex Invisible Fit, it has the Vibram outsole. So a lot of technology and thought went into this shoe, but it's also a good looking boot, and we've had some fun with the colors. So we also want to make sure that like our hike product is good looking, and this kind of goes for everything in the hike line. And our Colorado reps like to say from the streets to the peaks. So maybe you're going to go do a 14er and grab brunch after. We want it to be a good looking boot, but also want to reiterate that there is a lot of technology in these shoes. And then you can see specifically on the right, kind of in the middle there, that view of the outsole with the forked swallowtail. This is what we call the swallowtail design. The purpose of that is to propel you forward to make hiking easier. I'm probably sound like a broken record, but I think people see things like the swallowtail and they're like, "What's that?" Just trying to make hiking easier on you.
Right, so that's like a adaptation of the Meta Rocker, right? It's tuned specifically for hiking to kind of help you propel a little bit forward and then have that goat hoof suspension in the back. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And so this one's not as pronounced as some of the previous iterations, but still there, still purposeful in that design.
Right. So give you that little so that security as you heel strike on downhill to be able to then
Absolutely.
get you onto the flat part of your foot. Now let's kind of zoom in a little bit on the outsole on this shoe because there is some actually cool stuff going on, right? You guys sent me a pair of the low and a pair of the mids, and I've been using them a little bit. And I just noticed some of these features that I'm starting to see on some of the outsoles. The bumps. What are the names do you have for those little tiny bumps there?
Super, super technical term, teeth.
Okay.
That's what I like to call them. And you will see these extra teeth, as I'm going to call them, on our speed goat as well. So this Vibram traction lug technology, just adding some extra traction onto these lugs. And I think it's like, it looks like such a small detail, and it is, but again, that's what those details that High is really looking for and working with companies like Gore-Tex and Vibram of like, how can we make this more traction, more grippy? And so we added some teeth.
Yeah, right. So really, and so what's interesting is looking at the teeth direction. They're going to be pointing forward in the heel area, and this is towards the toe area. They're pointing backwards towards the back of the shoe, right, to give you the traction where you need it on that shoe. So it's a cool little like update, little subtle feature, and it's neat to see that going into the outsole, and with so much intentionality on there. Now, we talked
Yeah.
about the sort of active foot frame, right, and how it sits in there. And I think the best way to show this is that I took a shoe and cut it in half, like I always do, and put this picture up. So I see some things when I look at this invisible fit, and I'll talk about that. But what do you see from a Hoka perspective when you look at a cut shoe like this?
Yeah, I love whenever y'all cut shoes in half and send them to me. It's so great whenever I can look at the shoe, but also like take
Yeah.
them to clinics. But one thing you can notice here is the dual density foam. So you can actually see the dual density in the Sugar King EVA. So have a softer, like more plush right underfoot. And then that bottom layer is going to be more responsive. So you have that nice cushy step and feel that we talked about earlier, but we also want to make sure that we're propelling you forward. We're making hiking easier. So that's the purpose of a little bit firmer density foam on the bottom there. And it's so cool. You can see it right there. And then going back to the active foot frame, you know, seeing that we sit in the foam a little bit. Um, yeah.
Yeah, you can kind of see exactly how you do sit in when you talk about that active foot frame in this, right? How that foam wraps up and around your foot gives you that lateral stability, but also, does have it. It's interesting because you look on the outside of the shoe and it looks like a Hoka, right? It's got a lot of what looks
Mhm.
like cushioning that you sort of underfoot, and there is, but like you said, it actually a lot of that wraps up and around your foot rather than you sitting on top of that, an SUP.
Mhm.
Um, and then I called out right here. You can see when I cut it, I can see the dual density foams, and I can actually feel how different they are. I mean, they're quite a bit of different durometer on that
Mhm.
underfoot versus this sort of skeleton part of the foam. But you can also see that expressed on the outside with some interesting visible technology, right? The way that the higher density foam even has little cutouts in it for the other density foam to squish through. And that really can, I think, selling this can help. You can point that out to customers. You can feel the different foam densities and
Mhm.
point out to them because of the way the visible technology is built into this. Um, Another thing I noticed was some very interesting material choices. Some materials I've never seen before. When I look around like that collar area, that is a interesting um, textile. Can you tell me a little bit about some of the textile choices that went into this, specifically that collar material in this low?
Yeah, so this is the low version. The collar is a soft shroud like around the ankle area, and it does function to keep grit out without creating any intrusive structure. So it's a slightly thicker, like knitted fabric. I'm like, I wish you could touch it. I'm like, here, look, if I put it close enough to the camera, you could touch it, but it's really like nice feeling around the foot, feeling secure. So almost acting as a bit of a gaiter to keep some debris out.
Yeah, and it does. It's kind of cool. It truly comes around and wraps around your foot. And so here's where I'm going to get really techie for a second. So this is a low, and this did have this kind of shroud built into it to sort of close up and around your ankle, meaning that it's got a little tighter ankle area to get your foot in. So in order to get your foot into the shoe now, what you need to do is have a more active tongue area, right? You need a tongue that's going to be able to open up quite a bit to allow your foot to get in and out of the shoe. The same thing with a mid, of course, where you're going to need to have a tongue that's going to float open and closed. Now, Visible Fit was selected for both the mid and the low of this shoe. And what's interesting is that in order to kind of create that ability for the tongue to open up, you need to use a different cut pattern for the tongue section versus the rest of the shoe. Now, traditionally speaking, in Invisible Fit, it kind of went over the entire shoe. The way we would laminate or directly bond our membrane is to the shoe while it was laying flat like this, right? We bond directly to it, and then the shoe gets evolved into a boot, like what I'm holding up here. But in order to create a tongue area that can move open and close, we actually have to cut and sew another piece into there. But seam sealing that cut and sew has been very much a technical challenge. It's really challenging to seam seal through there because as you run the seam taping machine in that section, think about what's just on the opposite side, all the eyelet hardware, all the overlays. You can't really run a seam taping machine through that. So a new technology had to be developed in order to create an ability to seam seal that zone. And so what we've done now is develop this material that can be die cut and then heat transferred or heat pressed onto the upper of the shoe. And what I actually noticed was really interesting. This is the first time I've ever seen this. Is that rather than just having a straight cut piece that goes around, you can see some. If you look closely, you can see some scalloping that HOKA built into that seam tape piece to give it a little increased durability and a little bit of increased flexibility through that zone. This is a first to market to do that. We've seen some of these die cut pieces, but I've never seen it scalloped like you see right here. So again, getting super into the weeds here on how Invisible Fit works. But the whole point here was that now we can seam tape. Now you can have a tongue that opens up. Now HOKA can build that shroud around the ankle to keep the rock and dirt out, but we can still actively get our foot in and out without having to try to, like, we've all wrestled with shoes in the past where we could barely get our foot in and out. That is not an issue with this shoe. So we can incorporate Invisible Fit from the GORE-TEX technology standpoint and using the most updated technology, which is currently really going through this development cycle. HOKA was able to integrate in as a first to market this kind of scalloped die cut piece in there. Now, the result of that meaning that we can incorporate Invisible Fit into the shoe, and Invisible Fit really being a technology that you truly won't notice it's in the shoe. It does not affect the ride. It does not affect the fit of a shoe. You don't get that pop, that puckering, that popping that you might experience with other waterproof technologies. But you will notice it when you get into wet ground conditions, right? And that's when you're really gonna notice that your foot stays dry over the long haul. So kudos to HOKA for being early adopters to this technology and actually having the factories that can adapt and build with the brand new technology. So that was my in the weeds section right there. Really cool to kind of see some of that tech and what's going into this shoe. So Melanie, that's the Kaha 3, right? And we're going to get into a little more detail tomorrow with Hai around the like specific tech. So if you want to nerd out even more, we're going to do that tomorrow with Hai. But really, like thinking about it from that perspective you have as a person who has used a lot of hiking boots and sort of seen a lot of folks out hiking and helped people try on hiking shoes, right? What's your kind of overview of this shoe? How would you talk to a customer about this, and how might you help them to select the right shoe or the right Kaha for them?
Yeah, so I would say someone who is going out on a backpacking trip or a day hiker, and they are looking for a comfortable boot, with minimal break-in, hopefully, and maybe they're going like for me, like I live in Nashville, I go to the Smokies quite a bit. The Smokies have a lot of rain. So and they get very, very muddy. So something like this would do really well in the Smokies, or any wet or kind of burly mountain trail, whether you're long distance backpacking or day hiking. And sometimes people really like that upper, have like that secure around the ankle. But then one thing that's really cool that I like about the Kaha Low is that maybe that's just a little bit too much for some folks and they want some ankle support, but
Mm.
maybe not as high as this. That's what's so great about the Kaha Low is that it's not a super low hiker that you see.
Mhm.
So you still do have some support. And that's what I really like about this update. So having both of those options, I think, are really, really great.
Yeah, it's a cool offering for folks who are looking for a little bit heavier backpack, kind of longer term out, right? Versus going with like a big brown
Mhm.
boot, right? This is sort of a modern update. to that. And it is very interesting looking. I took these lows with me when I went to New Zealand, and I got a lot of comments as I was out on trails hiking around. They're like, wow, I've never seen anything that looks like
Cool.
that. So a lot of interesting style built into these shoes as well. But still
Yeah.
in the aggressive hiking backpacking category. For sure. Now, there is another use that we are seeing a lot out there, right? And it kind of splits lifestyle and it splits hike. As we know, a lot of people aren't going out on 3, 4 day backpacking trips and need a big supportive boot or maybe any of the
Yeah.
shoes that we see in this line. A lot of folks are kind of doing more urban hiking, maybe 2 miles out in an urban park. I think of Portland, right? And there's a
Mm,
big park right down right near the downtown, right? That you can just
yeah.
walk straight up to and then get into a couple of trails, right? And there's a different shoe for that. There's a different, actually, you guys have
Yes.
a whole different line for this type of hiker.
Yeah. Yeah. It's called the Transport. And the Transport has done really well for us, so much so that we decided to make its own little family, just like the Kaha has a family. Now the Transport has a family. So in the top left there, we have our classic Transport. And then about a year later, if I'm not mistaken, we came out with the Gore-Tex version. So we like to call this like the intersection of lifestyle and performance. So commuter friendly. Might even say versatile, but with a caveat to that, like I'm not going to go do LeConte and the Smokies. I'm probably not going to go do Whitney in this. But if I'm traveling or commuting and like you said there is a trail, maybe I will do some light hiking in this. And now I have the waterproof version, we have the truck up version, and then we have the Project Transport because we're Hoka and we like to disrupt sometimes. And so one thing that's really interesting about the Transport and its lug system, on the next slide, you'll see that it's not as intense of a lug Vibram system as our Kaha, so flatter, more broadly spaced lugs. And so the purpose of that is for that light hiking, that city life. If you take something like the Kaha, with this Vibram Mega Grip and you put it on pavement, it's going to be like sandpaper. You're going to wear down those lugs. So we wanted to come out with something where you can truly go from the streets to the peaks without messing up your Vibram outsole. So this is a very intentionally designed Vibram outsole to make sure that you can kind of perform on the streets or the peaks. Again, with that caveat, this is a shorter lug than this is I believe a 2.5 millimeter lug, whereas we have a 4 millimeter lug
Yeah.
on the Kaha. So.
Right, so it's not gonna feel like you're walking around on big old traction lugs when you're hiking through the
Mhm.
airport or when you're walking through town, right? That's not the feeling you want. It would be like we're having giant 4x4 tires on your sports car. It's not quite right.
Absolutely.
So this is
Mhm.
gonna, and it's gonna not wear as fast either. It's gonna having a little more option to sort of having those larger flat spots is gonna wear a little bit slower too over time, which is
Yeah,
nicer.
absolutely.
Now, there's a new shoe coming. We're going to preview this. You all aren't going to see this until this coming fall. But in this transport line, there's sort of this almost more bridgy type shoe that's coming out, right? So this is the
Yeah.
transport hike. Tell us a little bit about this rig.
Yeah, so this is exciting. So, what I just said with the lugs on the last slide, these are actually going to be 4 millimeter lugs. So this one you can actually maybe do a little bit more hiking with some muddier trails, like a little bit more hike centric than our Chukka. We put hike in the name, so we want people to be able to feel comfortable hiking. We call it like this one's going to be more of a versatile chukka for everyday adventures. So, want to kind of like seamlessly transition from town to trail. Um, and it still has those performance features and with Gore-Tex, and then the Vibram outsole 4 millimeter lugs. So, really wanting to make it a little bit more relevant in the hike space.
Right, so building in some of the hike features, but its DNA is still in that kind of city bound or maybe I don't know, travel shoe, something like that. But just upping the ability to get out on maybe a little more aggressive trail, or maybe just like the look. Right, this is really a lot of this is about the look in the transport. It really needs to look right for that consumer, yet it has all of the Hoka DNA we've talked about, right? The active
Totally.
foot frame, the rocker, the marshmallow foam, the cushioning is into this shoe. So this is going to be really it gives another option, right? Not nearly as
Yeah,
technical as the Kaha. Doesn't look nearly as technical as the Kaha, but really a good option for folks wanting that kind of bridge shoe.
yeah,
It's an exciting addition to the line, and
we're excited.
really, like you said, a specific shoe for everything, right? And so folks can really either quiver out, or if you get a customer who's just not, it's the Goldilocks shoe, right? You can kind of really start to hone in on the one that's perfect for your customer. It's
Yeah,
exciting. Well, thanks for previewing this, and we'll
yeah,
obviously talk about this more in the fall. But here we're
yes,
seeing it first, the Transport Hike GTX. Melanie, this has been really fun to explore this with you. I love getting your perspective and your ability to bring in your real life experience of being out there on trails and also working with customers. It was really fun to explore the Kaha hike product, Kaha 3, in sort of context of the other products that Hoka creates in the hike category, as well as putting into that framework of what we can always see in Hoka products. And then thank you for allowing us to sneak peek the new Transport Hike GTX. Fun to know that that's coming down the road here as another hike option for folks looking to maybe split that difference between sort of lifestyle and hike.